Greetings to my fellow reality sandwich eaters. Kyle Rosner here, one of the conscious agents of Reality Sandwich, coming back with another great Share Your Experience interview. I'm joined today by the wonderful Jonathan Clark. Jonathan, thanks for taking the time with me today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Kyle.
Excellent. I was really excited to hear from you and share your story today. You know, something I haven't really heard a lot about, but you specialize in physical movement and physical body repair paired with, psychedelic and plant medicines. So would love to hear, could you share a little deep dive about yourself here to our audience?
Yeah, certainly. So I do specialize in combining corrective exercise and other healing modalities with the psychedelic experience to go after chronic pain in general. My techniques can be focused more on the physical injury type side of things, but have applications elsewhere as well. And excuse me, the reason I got into this type of work and the reason I became a specialist in this is out of necessity. I broke my L5 vertebra in half when I was 17 years old in a skiing accident, and I spent almost the next 20 years in chronic pain and searching for solutions and not finding them for the most part, unfortunately. And
could you walk me through that first skiing accident? What went down and what was your reaction?
Yeah.
What were the doctor's original diagnosis and healing plan they had?
That's a bit of a loaded question. I'll get into it though. So I was going down a very steep double black diamond in Durango, Colorado, and snow caved in underneath me. I tumbled down the mountain several hundred feet. I actually didn't know I'd hurt my back at the time, strangely enough. Maybe it was adrenaline, or the way the doctors explained it is you got like the column part of the spine, and then you have like the one that kind of looks like a scallop, and then you have the part of the spine that kind of looks like a butterfly. And those two broke apart. So I was very fortunate that I didn't injure my spinal cord, but that part of the bone broke apart, and the musculature, I guess, kind of held it in place for a while. And I climbed back up the mountain, got my gear, skied out of it. I thought I'd hurt my knee. That subsided after about a week, and then a month later, I was torquing a tire iron, and my whole body just erupted into spasms, and I was in pain for the next 18 and a half plus years. Before it finally stopped. And I initially recovered decently. After about a year, I was back to being able to do a lot of my normal activities. I went off to college and whatnot. But by my senior year, I was unable to walk. I took a semester off of college to get back surgery. That was a temporary Band-Aid that worked for a few years. Within 2-3 years, it was starting to hurt again. Within 5 years, I was getting to the point where I could no longer walk again, at least without assistance. I was working as a software tester in Seattle at the time. I'm from Albuquerque, New Mexico originally, and I had to quit my job. I was just in so much pain, I was no longer able to think at the type of level necessary for that kind of work. And it became clear that my problem was very severe and that we didn't know what to do. I was going to doctors all the time and not getting answers, right? I was walking off the cane by the time I moved back home. A year later, I was in a wheelchair. 3 years after that, I was still in a wheelchair. And when I really began to lose hope was after about a year in the wheelchair, when I found another doctor, another surgeon who was willing to take a look at my case, and he takes some images, and I'm just praying he finds something he can operate on. And instead he just tells me I have the spine of an 80-year-old man and he doesn't know what to do for me. And at that point, I was 32 years old. I was thinking, I'm in this much pain at 32. What's 42 and 52 and 62 going to look like? And I didn't want to find out. And that's when I began to slip into a pretty serious suicidal depression. Finally, in January of 2019, things started to turn around a little bit. I found my dad bought a book for me called Pain Free. And I saw the title. I thought it was bullshit. But I did eventually end up reading it, and I tried some of the exercises, and I felt something different. And unlike all the physical therapy I'd gone to, it didn't make me hurt worse. At the very least, it didn't make me worse. And that was one of the first times I could say that a physical therapy hadn't done that to me. So I gave it another shot. And I kept on doing it every day for 2 months. I stood up out of my wheelchair for the first time for a few seconds. Started studying to become a therapist, a posture therapist. I hired a posture therapist to help me. And 9 months later, I was no longer using the wheelchair. I kept on progressing for a while. Eventually hit a wall, though, where my mobility had improved, but I was still, in some ways, I was in more pain because now I was moving around and having to do more things, but I was still had a lot of problems still, right? Like I had fixed a lot of the issues, especially a lot of the physical issues. Not all of them. I had fixed a lot of them, but what I didn't realize what was going on is, and what no doctor I'd ever been to had explained to me very well, at least, was that my brain had changed to be rewired to have the experience of pain hard coded into my framework of reality. It was just hard coded in there. And that's called nociplastic pain, and there's also psychogenic pain. There's all, which I think is maybe a lot of overlap. But anyways, there's lots of reasons that pain persists even after the physical reasons have subsided or been healed. And I began to have some pretty serious suicidal. I'd gotten better as I was improving, but then when I plateaued and could no longer find a way forward, I really began to slip into that kind of suicidal depression again. And that's when the mushrooms found me, thankfully. So do you have questions about that part of the story before I move on to the fun stuff with the psychedelics?
Yeah, I'm curious. I'm curious what was in this book, what kind of exercises you were doing exactly. What is somebody's first step for? My dad was in 2 car accidents. He's got spine and back issues. He's definitely going through a similar journey to yourself.
Right. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. So this book, there was about 50 exercises in the book. I could do about 5 of them. Most of them were in a single position called static back. If you can kind of use your imagination with me, if you're laying flat on the ground, but then you have your legs up in the air, and then if you know the zigzag Tetris pieces, your body looks like that. Your lower legs are parallel to the ground. Your upper legs are perpendicular to the ground, and your lower back or your upper body is flat on the ground. So you got that Tetris zigzag shape going on. And there's a lot of exercises you can do from that position. And it's especially good for relaxing the hip flexors and decreasing upper body compensations for lower body actions. And depending on what you're doing with the upper body, you can reverse compensations in other directions as well. So, that position and a handful of exercises I can do in that position are what got me to stand up out of a wheelchair. That after a few months of that, and Now I would spend sometimes 3 to 4 hours a day in that position, right? And with it just takes time, because what we're doing is we're changing the brain. We're changing body schema models in the brain. And we'll talk about more of that when we get to the psychedelic aspect of things. But basically the type of what's different about these type of exercises is that they go after there's 3 big things in posture therapy: deviations, dysfunctions, and compensations, right? So dysfunctions or a deviation would be if I see a guy with a shoulder and one shoulder is higher than the other. And I ask him, okay, show me your shoulder flexion. Do this for me. And instead of putting his arm above his head like this, he tries to lift his arm and he does this type of thing. Mm-hmm. So the dysfunction is that he can't do this. The compensation is he does this instead. And eventually all the muscles that are working too hard, that are working outside their design parameters, are going to start complaining about the fact that they're being abused, essentially. And that's what's different about this type of therapy, is this deviation, dysfunction, compensation, reversal relationship we have going on. And does that answer your question there, or get you started about how someone? Okay, yeah.
So and then, how did you from that you're doing these exercises, you're still managing the pain mentally. How did you discover the potential of psilocybin and mushrooms?
Yeah,
and, tell us about your first experience there.
Yeah, definitely. So psilocybin, like I said, found me quite by accident. My CPAP broke, my snoring machine, and I found a used one on Facebook Marketplace. I go and buy it, and the guy notices that I'm walking funny, and he says, we start talking about it, and I'm telling him what's going on. He says, hold on a minute. And he goes inside, he grabs a little bag of mushrooms, and he comes back out and gives them to me. And he said, never know, it might help. And I was like, okay, I'll thanks, I guess. I didn't know anything about him. But a few weeks later, I was having a really bad day. I decided to try a small dose, about 3/4 of a gram. And I noticed that my muscle spasms were not as severe. I noticed that my nerve pain had also been lessened. And those were my 2 big areas of problems physically at that point, were muscle spasticity and nerve pain. And it wasn't permanent or anything. It was just temporary. After the drug wore off, it came back. However, I got this idea of, that muscle spasticity was so much less, so much more effective than really anything else I had tried before. What if I took a larger dose and did some of my exercises, or really every exercise I could fit into that, 5-6 hours? And my idea was maybe I'll get 3% more benefit. If I got 3% extra benefit, I'd be celebrating. I was really desperate. And instead, I got a lot more than I expected. The first thing I noticed as I started doing these are exercises I had done hundreds, if not thousands of times, but it felt like I was doing them for the first time. And that I was noticing things about the exercises, noticing things about how they affected my body that I had never felt before. It was like my mind-body connection had been turbocharged to a certain extent, right? And when as I kept on doing these exercises, I started finding that, I definitely was getting more benefit from them. And it seemed like it was a lot more than that 3% I was hoping for. But when it was interesting, I just kept on going. What I really noticed, or when things really got crazy, was I started to see this vision of a musculoskeletal system that would mimic every motion I did. So I did an exercise and I would see it do the exercise. And instead of just looking at skin, I'm looking at muscles and bone and soft tissue. And I'm really starting to understand how these exercises are affecting me in a completely different way. I'm visualizing them rather than just having to feel them. And I'm, up to that point, even though I had been studying posture therapy for about 2 years, the best way I can describe it is that the several hundred exercises, it was like puzzle pieces on a table that I couldn't figure out how to put together right. None of them fit. And I couldn't figure out how to target the areas of my body that I want to target. I wasn't good at that yet. However, after this experience, I was never stuck. Going through, especially once I got to the point where I asked it what I should do, and it started doing exercises, and I started following it. And this was like all this information that I had studied over the course of a couple years being rearranged in my brain through my visual cortex. And 6 months later, I hiked in my first disc golf tournament, and that was a 9-mile hike in the mountains.
Oh, wow.
That was something that I never thought I would be able to do ever. Like that was something that I just figured was completely outside of my capabilities. I didn't initially start developing this therapy right after that, though. I became a posture therapist. I got my certification. I started practicing standard posture therapy. I helped a lot of people that way, and that was great. However, there were also people I couldn't help, people who were in this type of situation I was in, where the pain had truly become chronic, and it seemed their brain had been altered to, no matter what we did, they just were going to keep on feeling that pain. It seemed like, about a year and a half after my healing, I had a client who was in a very bad situation, very much like mine. And after a few months, she was getting better, but it wasn't happening fast enough for her. And she was on short-term disability, but then she lost her job when that ran out. And then her long-term disability claim was denied. And then she was about to lose her house, and then she killed herself. And from that point forward, I just became obsessed with figuring out what had happened to me, figuring out a mechanism of action, figuring out how to leverage that mechanism of action and how to make it safe, how to make it repeatable. And that's been my overarching goal in life since that day.
Physical pain, especially with our current medical system, can be truly agonizing. As you experience firsthand, and navigating that, which is the importance of getting access to these plant medicines and pairing that with your modicum you've created here.
Yeah, there's so much more potential to help people and even reverse the problems of the opioid crisis that were fueled by our medical system's inability to treat chronic pain in the first place, or at least largely fueled by our inadequacy in this field. We spend hundreds of billions of dollars on chronic pain every year, but we still have tens of millions of people with intractable pain who are unable to either get the resources they need or there's just no one in the medical system that can help them. One of those two. In my book, I talk about that In 2018, it was estimated that 1 out of every 10 suicides, chronic pain was a contributing factor. This is a life or death situation for millions upon millions of people. And it's unfortunate that, in my opinion, the stigma that was placed on chronic pain patients as a result of the opioid crisis is a large barrier to access to psychedelics for people in chronic pain, because they're going to be seen as junkies looking for more drugs rather than people who need help. And I think that is something that the psychedelic community needs to really become more conscious of, that this is happening, and that this movement within the psychedelic community is fringe at this point. And while it's not just me, there are other people. There's a Psychedelics and Pain Association. There's Cluster Busters. There's Court Wing with Remap Therapeutics, and a number of other people working on these types of things. But we are having to fight very hard to get a share of the conversation,
Well, happy to be that platform to storytell.
Thank you.
And
yes, thank you, Kyle.
This. Curious, I'd love to hear more about the pushback and conversations you've had with previous physical therapists who work with you and the doctors, and what has their reaction been when you tell them about your new regimen you're on?
Honestly, I haven't been to a doctor in, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. So, I'm not really certain what they would say. I do have, my book, as like, the praise on the back of it. There's a quote by a doctor of physical therapy named Marin Campbell out of Denver, who is very interested in what I'm doing. And she's actually going to be consulting with me on the retreats I'm putting together about this work and everything as well. So, I do think we're going to start seeing a little bit more traction. I have, since I released my book, I have noticed that I've got a couple more connections on LinkedIn from some physical therapists, so I'm hoping to reach out to them pretty soon. But I can tell you something that I've also done some consulting with a researcher at a university, and I've helped improve his study design with a study regarding fear avoidance and pain and things like that. I've talked with some other physical therapists. There is a lot of fear from them that talking out publicly about being in support of psychedelics, even for mental health, they're afraid about licensure or their public image in many ways, or they are concerned with potential legal ramifications in various ways. And especially researchers are very hamstrung in terms of who they're allowed to associate with publicly. So there are a number of factors at play that can, even for the people in the medical profession who very much want to speak out about this type of thing, why they're afraid to do so. And in terms of how we reduce those types of barriers, I honestly don't have a good solution at this point in time, other than we just keep on talking about it, and we keep on encouraging people in the psychedelic community who are in a place to influence policy to, while I understand that we're not going to make any changes on a legal front right now, we can be working to insert language into policies that leaves the door open for research into psychedelics and chronic pain, that leaves the door open for policy change or committees to explore these types of benefits. So I think that's probably where we could begin, but that's a difficult message to get across, I think. And there's only a few voices right now trying to shout it from the rooftops, and we could use a few more.
Beautifully put. I'm curious, when with your first psilocybin experience, what was that dosage and what was your kind of preparation for the right way to take that? And how do you recommend that to potential patients?
Yeah. So, I do give like full dosage guidelines in my book. It is a nuanced discussion. So I want to preface everything I'm about to say with what I say for me doesn't necessarily apply for anyone else. Okay. And for that experience, it was 2 grams of albino penis envy. And I mean, that's a potent strain. Now, that may have been something more like 4 to 6 grams of a standard cubensis. However, when we start looking at in ancient indigenous cultures, hunter-gatherer indigenous cultures, all their religions are based on spirit world visitations. However, not all of these cultures had access to psychedelics, or even if they did, they chose not to use them because they found other ways to get there, be it through trance dance, severe physical stress, dehydration, starvation, all these types of things. And what we find is, what I think is that when we start combining more vigorous physical activity with the psychedelic experience, it can amplify some of those, some aspects of the psychedelic effect, perhaps in a similar way that going through those extreme physical exertions might have for some indigenous medicine people. That's one hypothesis I have as to how that experience became so powerful on a relatively low dose, or maybe it had more to do with the fact that I'd been doing these exercises for 2 years beforehand, and my brain had really good models of what to expect from them. And then when it was slightly different with the addition of the psychedelics, I was able to hone in on those differences really quickly, and that produced some type of more powerful synesthetic effect, or maybe a combination of these things. But these typical dosages I recommend for people starting out who want to explore this are qualitatively where you have decent closed eye visuals, but you can operate with your eyes open with minimal distortion to the outside world. If you're going through, maybe you're going from a sitting to standing to the ground and back up, or using a wall to lean against in various ways. You need to be able to balance. You need to be able to be safe with this type of work. So you definitely don't want to go into the high doses and start put yourself your body into a position you're not ready for.
Exactly. What have you experienced, besides psilocybin, any use with other plant medicines like cannabis for pain management or any of these other potential modalities?
For me personally, I used cannabis extensively for pain management. It kept me from killing myself. That's what cannabis did for me. It kept it on that razor thin margin that I could keep myself loaded all the time and be dissociated from the pain to a certain extent. To me, for me personally, it wasn't the most healthy way to handle pain. It was more healthy than swallowing a bullet, but not ideal. That's not to say that I think cannabis is a bad medicine or anything like that. I'm just reporting my personal experience, comparing the qualitative differences between something like psilocybin and cannabis. Now, I have been experiencing much more recently, and in the book I talk extensively about LSD as well. LSD can be really great for this type of work, especially if I want to focus on like one single specific pose. For instance, I've spent several hours in the frog pose on LSD fixing some lumbar rotation one time. Just that one pose, figuring out little tiny new intricacies about it. Now, on the other end of the scale, I've also done work with Changa, with this postradelic therapy, and that is a very different type of experience than psilocybin. You're not going to be doing many dynamic exercises. You're going to be in a static position, and you're just going to hang out there for the duration of the experience, or at least for the breakthrough portion of it. However, I've had that was my Changa experience is not quite ready to go like too public with it yet, because my next book I want to call The Postradelic Hypothesis, The Changa Chronicles. But it was incredibly powerful and probably the best experience of my life, most moving experience of my life. And I'm really excited that at my retreats, I'm going to be doing 2 mushroom ceremonies and a Changa ceremony as well, with a focus on hip flexor function restoration. And that I think that is going to be probably the biggest game changer about what I'm doing down in Mexico. And the Changa, what I really like about it is that the duration is so much shorter. Like, I love psilocybin, but I rarely have 6 hours I can set aside. I'm a busy guy. I work 12, 16 hours a day most days. That's so something like Changa, you can get, in many cases, I think you can compact that down if you're very, very specific and very targeted and very well prepared. I think there's a lot of opportunity to kind of speed up the process there. Additionally, afterwards, it destabilizes the body schema more, and you have to put in a lot harder work after the ceremony for the next week or two with Changa, but the neuroplasticity is like off the charts compared to the psilocybin, it seems. And you can make, now if you don't do your integration work, you might slip. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, right? But if you're committed to it, you can make some crazy, crazy improvements.
I really like that term postradelic as well. Very good fit for the work that you do.
Yeah. And I call this therapy. It's alignment manifesting. That's what I translate postradelic as, because we are quite literally changing our brain to manifest improved physical alignment, because our posture is a cumulative physical manifestation of the body schema models in our brain. And body schema controls everything about how our musculoskeletal system moves and functions, and what we know about how it's positioned in space-time. And you can get to points in the psychedelic experience where you can visualize your body schema in real time. I call it a synesthetic biofeedback interface, where you can conduct real-time muscle tension or muscle testing using the visuals in the psychedelic experience. If you can, that happens spontaneously. I got there last night on 5.1 grams of Bluey Vuitton.
Oh wow!
And it's like putting pieces together, like, in Minority Report, when he's like got his hands and he's like doing all the things with the visual screen, and he's like putting pieces together. It's almost like doing that with the visuals, and like finding how to make okay, I move my body and this part moves over here, and like putting together this like multi-dimensional puzzle. It's very bizarre.
Yeah, sounds like wonderful therapy.
Yeah, I love it. It's pretty fun.
How did the manifestation of your book, come about? I'm curious about your creative process and how you decided, you wanted to get these ideas down on paper.
Right. I started and stopped several times before I kind of found a way that worked.
Mm-hmm.
And I also had to get to a point in my career where it was appropriate to really make the switch to psychedelics. I worked in just standard posture therapy for a couple of years before I felt like I had established myself well enough to make that switch. And also, a previous business relationship kind of came to an end right as I had really honed my technique really well. And so everything just kind of came together. I went that business relationship ended a couple weeks before the Psychedelic Science 2023 last summer. So I bought a ticket, went up there, and started making connections in the psychedelic world to bring this type of therapy out. I started my podcast first, and the podcast was actually quite useful in terms of writing the book because it one, I was able to refer back to it in several portions. Like if you want to learn more about this topic, go explore this with this guest. However, once I just started with an outline. I had degrees in engineering and computer science, so I'm a rational, type of person. I started just figuring out what each chapter needed to be about, how many chapters I needed, what story I really needed to tell, and just started cranking it out. Now, when I got to the portion of editing, for any budding writers out there, you do all your writing yourself. But when you get to the editing portion, you got to go start using the AI because it is truly incredible what it can do for the editing portion of your work and how you can increase the quality of your content that way. One really cool thing is I came up with a metaphor to explain a particular posture therapy concept, and it wasn't quite working right. And the AI came up with a new metaphor for me, and it wasn't quite right either. I said, no, I don't want this one. This one, like you did about a musical symphony. Give me a different metaphor about, and this was like a complex, like long section that had been written in a metaphorical way. And it completely found a new like gears and levers metaphor and rewrote the entire thing, but it's still all my ideas, just put forth in a better way. So if people who are struggling with writing, as long as you've put your own ideas down first, that can be a really great tool for people who are looking to get into that type of work. The creative process in general was just really largely drawn from my experiences and my research of the process I had to go through to figure out what my mechanism of action was and how to leverage it. I based my work heavily off of Andrew Gallimore's work in reality switch technologies. If you're not familiar with Andrew Gallimore's work, he doesn't talk about anything related to chronic pain in that book, but it's all about how psychedelics affect the brain. And in order to talk about how psychedelics affect the brain, he had to first go into how psychedelics or how the brain creates your reality framework, how your brain simulates your reality for you in the absence of them. And that turned out to be the key to understanding the mechanisms at play with body schema and how I was able to come up with a model for how these body schema models were being updated, how the posture therapy was doing that, and how the psychedelics were modifying this process over time. That's when it really became clear that posture has less to do with our musculature than it does with our brain. And before that, that was a big revelation for me. I did not understand. I was so focused on the body and on the physical aspect of things that I was missing a huge component of it all, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of how the creative process worked for me. It was just a lot of time. I mean, all day, every day until I fell asleep at my desk,
Mm-hmm.
and continuous improvement.
Very nice. How do you, when you're working with patients, how do you broach the subject of plant medicine, psychedelics, for those unfamiliar with your work and your personal story?
Now, it's a little bit easier that I have like an ability to reference some authority on the subject. Like, here, you can go look at my book and like read my extensive ideas on it. I didn't tell very many clients about my work with psychedelics initially. First off, even just a couple years ago, the stigma was quite different. There was like, I didn't tell anyone outside of my parents and my girlfriend that I had done psychedelics for the better part of 2 years. I was working on this stuff, but I didn't tell anybody about it. And when I finally did get the courage to tell a few patients about it, I would only tell them if they were at the point where it was clear that they had seen initial progress and then hit a wall. That doesn't happen with everybody. Some people, like, the posture therapy alone is great, and within 2 months they're doing amazing. I've seen within like 3 days incredible changes that I flat out cannot explain. But that's the exception, not the rule, right? The more rule is that we see the first breakthrough after about 2 months, and then the next breakthrough, maybe a few months after that. And then as we get to the more core issues, each breakthrough could become harder to achieve, that kind of that 80-20 rule. So when I started to notice that I had other clients who were getting into that type of locked up position, and I started to mention it to them, but I didn't have a protocol they could follow yet. Or even when I did have a protocol in my head, I didn't have a way to teach it to them in an effective manner, So I just kind of had to keep my mouth shut about it for quite some time. And that was really challenging for me because I could see how much pain these people were having, but I didn't know anything about the drug interactions at the time. I didn't know anything about how to handle like possible emotional crises that might come up in the psychedelic space. Like, I didn't know anything about facilitation at that point. So I had to learn I had to go get training in facilitation first, right? So it was like this whole process before I could responsibly tell people about this. I didn't know if my thing was just a fluke. Like, I didn't want to get people's hopes up and be like, yeah, it could save your life like it did mine. And then they go and try it and they get nothing. And maybe they slip into a deeper depression thinking that they're unhelpable, That's, you have to be mindful of that type of stuff with people in pain, that everything that doesn't work is going to be another fucking like hit to the stomach, So there was lots of ethical considerations that I had to wrap my head around before I could really tell people about this.
Well, Jonathan, I really want to thank you, for the work that you've done and you continue to do. Where can people find your book and find you if they're going through this journey and want to, upgrade their physical therapy and get the treatment that they need?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find my book, Psychedelics, Chronic Pain, and the Posturdelic Hypothesis on Amazon. It's on digital and print formats. You can find more information about posturedelic therapy at chronicpainmushroomretreats.com. And the big thing, even if you're not interested in going to one of our retreats, these are a luxury retreat in Mexico. So, I mean, it is a higher ticket item. It's not going to be for everybody. However, that doesn't mean there's nothing there for you. Okay. If you go to chronicpainmushroomretreats.com and click on the little top bar that says free integration, I have a completely free lifetime membership to posturedelic integration communities. And that is where people who are exploring this type of work on their own can find a safe place to explore it, where I'll be participating in the chat, answering questions, doing live Q&As. And of course, there'll be other people there who are pursuing a path of healing as well. And you never know what obstacles you may have in common that they could help you out with, right? Those are the best three ways: the book on Amazon, chronicpainmushroomretreats.com, the free integration communities.
Wonderful, Jonathan. Thank you for the time today.
Thank you, Kyle.